Imagine a hidden force inside your mind, quietly shaping every decision, every fear, every failure, controlling your life without your permission. And the worst part, you may not even realize it. Think about this for a moment. The most dangerous enemy in your life does not shout at you. It does not threaten you. It does not stand in front of you as something obvious that you can fight. It speaks softly, calmly, reasonably. In fact, it speaks in your own voice. And that is exactly why it has so much power over you. From the moment you wake up, this voice begins its work. It comments on who you are, what you can do, what you should avoid. It reminds you of past failures, not loudly but subtly. It says, be careful. It says, not now. It says, you tried before. Remember how that ended? And because it sounds like you never stop to question whether it is telling the truth. You assume it must be right because it feels familiar. It feels like common sense. It feels like wisdom gained from experience. But slowly, quietly, it becomes the authority over your life. This is how the silent enemy is born. It does not arrive suddenly. It grows over years. Every disappointment, every rejection, every moment of fear feeds it. And instead of recognizing it as something separate from you, you absorb it. You start to believe that this voice is your intuition, your personality, your identity. You say, this is just who I am. But what you are really saying is, this is the voice that has been shaping me without my permission. The dangerous part is not that this voice exists. Everyone has it. The dangerous part is that it convinces you it is protecting you. It tells you it is keeping you safe from embarrassment, from failure, from pain. And in a way, it is telling the truth. It is very good at keeping you safe. Safe from growth. Safe from risk. Safe from becoming someone you have never been before. It builds invisible walls around your potential and calls them boundaries. It turns fear into policy and hesitation into principle. Notice how this voice never says, I'm afraid. That would be too honest. Instead, it says, let's wait until the timing is right. It never says, I don't believe in you. Instead, it says, be realistic. It never says, stay small. Instead, it says, don't get your hopes too high. And because it sounds reasonable, you obey it. Day after day, decision after decision, until one day you look back and realize that years have passed and nothing has changed. What makes this enemy truly powerful is that it borrows your memories as evidence. It reminds you of every mistake you ever made. It replays moments of embarrassment and pain, not to heal them, but to warn you. See, it says, this is what happens when you try. And without realizing it, you begin to live your life based not on possibility, but on avoidance. You choose paths that require the least resistance, not because they fulfill you, but because they feel familiar. And here is the uncomfortable truth. The voice does not force you to listen. It persuades you. It negotiates with you. It sounds patient. It tells you there is always tomorrow. And tomorrow, like a horizon, keeps moving further away. This is why intelligent people, thoughtful people, self-aware people can remain trapped for so long. The enemy is not crude or aggressive. It is sophisticated. It speaks the language of logic, responsibility, and caution. It flatters you by sounding mature. But if you listen closely, you will notice something unsettling. This voice never urges you toward discomfort that leads to growth. It never pushes you into the unknown where transformation happens. It always pulls you back into what you already know, even if what you know is slowly draining you. It would rather see you quietly dissatisfied than openly uncertain. Because uncertainty contains possibility, and possibility threatens its control. The moment you begin to recognize this voice as something you have, rather than something you are, a crack appears in the prison. You start to see that not every thought deserves obedience. Not every warning is wisdom. Not every hesitation is truth. This does not mean the voice disappears. It won't. But it loses its absolute authority. It becomes one voice among many, not the ruler of your choices. And that is the first shift. Not fighting the voice, not silencing it, simply seeing it for what it is. A habit of mind, a collection of old fears pretending to be your identity. When you realize that, you stop asking, is this thought true? And start asking, where is this thought trying to keep me? And the answer, almost always, is the same place you have been stuck for years. The silent enemy only survives in darkness. The moment you become conscious of it, its power begins to fade. Once you begin to notice this silent enemy, something even more unsettling reveals itself. This voice did not appear out of nowhere. It was trained, conditioned, slowly shaped by repetition. And the reason it feels so convincing is because It has been rehearsed thousands of times inside your mind without challenge. Thoughts repeated long enough stop feeling like thoughts. They start feeling like facts. From a very young age, you were absorbing messages about who you should be, what is acceptable, what is risky, and what is impossible. Some of these messages came from parents, some from teachers, some from society, and many from moments when life hurt you unexpectedly. Each time you felt rejected, embarrassed, or defeated, your mind tried to protect you by creating a rule. Don't do that again. Don't trust too much. Don't stand out. Over time, these rules stacked on top of each other until they formed a rigid internal system. And now you live inside that system, often without realizing it. This is how the enemy strengthens itself. It turns past pain into permanent identity. This realization does not instantly free you, but it weakens the illusion. The enemy can no longer hide behind the mask of truth when you see how often it shows up at the exact moments your life could expand. And slowly you begin to test it. Small acts of defiance, small choices that say, I will act even while this voice is speaking. That is how the balance of power begins to shift. The enemy loses strength not when you destroy it, but when you stop letting it decide who you are allowed to become. As you go deeper, you start to realize that this silent enemy does not only speak through fear or doubt, it also disguises itself as logic. This is one of its most dangerous forms. It doesn't always say, you can't. Sometimes it says, this isn't the right time. You need more preparation. Let's wait until things are more stable. And because it sounds reasonable, you don't resist it. You agree with it. You nod internally and postpone your life once again. This is how years pass without dramatic failure, yet without real progress either. You remain intelligent, aware, capable, and strangely immobile. The enemy understands something very well. Intelligent people don't need obvious lies. They need sophisticated delays. And so it gives you explanations instead of excuses, analysis instead of action, understanding instead of movement. You become someone who knows a lot about change but rarely experiences it. Notice how often you replay situations in your head instead of stepping into new ones. You imagine conversations you might have, risks you might take, futures you might build. In your mind, everything moves. In reality, very little does. This creates the illusion of growth. You feel busy internally, so you assume something meaningful is happening. But insight without embodiment slowly turns into frustration, and that frustration quietly feeds the enemy. There is also a deeper layer here. The enemy protects an old self-image. Even if that image is limiting, it is familiar. You know how to survive as this version of yourself. You know how to explain your disappointments, how to manage expectations, how to avoid complete collapse. Becoming someone new would require you to let go of stories you have told for years about who you are and why your life looks the way it does. That feels like a kind of death. So the mind resists. It resists by keeping you busy with inner conflict instead of outer commitment. You debate with yourself endlessly. One part wants change, another part warns against it. You weigh pros and cons, you look for certainty. But certainty never arrives because certainty is not how transformation works. Transformation begins with a decision made in the presence of doubt. And the enemy knows that if you ever truly accept this, its control weakens. Pay attention to how often you wait to feel ready. Readiness becomes the condition you place on action, but readiness is a feeling, and feelings follow behavior, not the other way around. The enemy flips this order. It convinces you that confidence must come before action, clarity before movement, motivation before discipline, and so you wait. And while you wait, the enemy remains unchallenged. There is also shame involved, though it often hides well. A quiet belief that says, at this age, I should already have figured this out. Or, if I were truly capable, I wouldn't struggle like this. These thoughts don't shout, they whisper. And because they whisper, you rarely confront them directly. Instead, you adjust your ambition downward. You aim for what feels safe, not what feels true. You stop asking for what you actually want and start asking only for what you believe you deserve. This is one of the cruelest tricks of the enemy. It doesn't have to destroy your dreams. It only has to make them smaller, manageable, realistic, acceptable, and you cooperate with this shrinking because it reduces anxiety in the short term. But long term, it creates a quiet grief, a sense that you betrayed something essential in yourself. Even if you can't fully name what it was, at some point, you begin to confuse self-control with self-denial. You call it discipline. You call it maturity, but deep down something feels off. Discipline should give you energy. It should align you with purpose. When it drains you and leaves you hollow, it is often obedience to fear wearing a respectable mask. The turning point comes when you stop negotiating endlessly with your inner resistance, when you realize that you don't need to defeat every doubt to move forward. You don't need permission from your fear. You don't need to solve your entire psychology before taking one honest step. The enemy thrives on total solutions. It collapses under simple, imperfect action. This is where responsibility quietly replaces blame. Not harshly, not with self-attack, but with clarity. You see that no one else can step into your life for you. No one else can override your patterns. And while this truth is heavy, it is also freeing. Because the moment you accept that your stagnation is maintained internally, you also accept that change can begin internally too. You stop asking, "Why am I like this?" and start asking, "What am I willing to do differently today?" Even if fear is present, that question shifts everything. It removes the enemy from the position of authority and places it where it belongs, on the sidelines, making noise but no longer making decisions. And the moment you act while it is still speaking, you prove something powerful to yourself. The enemy can influence you, but it does not own you. As you continue to observe this inner struggle, something important becomes clear. The enemy is not only reactive, it is predictive. It anticipates your growth before it happens and moves early to stop it. This is why, just as you begin to feel momentum, a strange discomfort appears. Not fear exactly, not doubt in the obvious sense, but a subtle tightening. A voice that says, if you change, something will be lost. And in a way, that voice is telling the truth. Something will be lost, but what it never tells you is what will be gained. The mind has an ancient loyalty to familiarity. It values what is known over what is meaningful. Even pain, when it is familiar, feels safer than uncertainty. So when you start to move toward a truer version of yourself, the mind reacts as if a threat has appeared. Not because growth is dangerous, but because it disrupts the inner order you've been living with. You may hate your patterns, but you understand them. You know how to function inside them. Change demands that you become a beginner again, and the ego deeply resists that. This is why people often sabotage themselves right before a breakthrough. Not consciously, almost never consciously. It happens through distraction, exhaustion, sudden loss of interest, or an unexpected crisis that pulls attention away. The enemy is clever. It doesn't need to convince you that your goal is wrong. It only needs to interrupt your relationship with it. Distance weakens desire. Delay cools conviction. And slowly what once felt urgent becomes optional. There is also a deeper fear at work here. The fear of responsibility. As long as you remain almost there, you can still blame circumstances, other people, timing, or past wounds. But the moment you step fully into your potential, excuses lose their power. If you become capable, you also become accountable. You can no longer say, "I would have if only." And for many people, that loss of narrative protection is terrifying. So the mind offers a compromise. It says, stay aware but don't act. Understand yourself, but don't challenge yourself. Talk about growth, but don't risk transformation. This way, you get the identity of someone who is deep, thoughtful, and self-aware without paying the cost of change. And because this identity is socially rewarded, even admired, the trap tightens quietly. You look evolved. Inside, you remain stalled. Another subtle mechanism is over-identification with struggle. At some point, the struggle itself becomes part of who you are. You don't just have problems. You are someone who is always working through something. Letting go of that struggle would mean letting go of a familiar sense of self. Who are you without your inner conflict? Without your complexity? Without your wounds as reference points? The enemy whispers that without these, you might become ordinary, shallow, or exposed. But this is a distortion. Healing and growth do not flatten you. They integrate you. They don't erase depth. They give it direction. Yet the mind fears integration because it removes internal drama. And drama for the ego feels like aliveness even when it's painful. You may notice that whenever you approach simplicity, clear choices, direct action, honest boundaries, you feel strangely uncomfortable. Simplicity threatens the enemy because it removes places to hide. When things are simple, responsibility is visible. There's no fog to disappear into, so the mind complicates. It adds layers, theories, interpretations. It turns life into a puzzle instead of a path. This is where courage takes a different form. Not loud, not aggressive, but quiet and steady. Courage here means staying with the discomfort of growth without immediately trying to explain it away. It means allowing the old self to dissolve without rushing to define the new one. It means acting without a complete identity update, trusting that clarity will follow movement. At this stage, progress feels less like inspiration and more like integrity. You do what you said you would do, even when no emotional reward appears immediately. You stop waiting for internal alignment and begin creating it through consistent action. This is deeply unsettling for the enemy because it removes its primary leverage, your moods, your doubts, your hesitation, and slowly something shifts. The enemy doesn't disappear, but its voice weakens. It becomes background noise instead of command. You realize that the mind can protest without being obeyed, that fear can exist without controlling your direction. That uncertainty does not mean danger, it means expansion. This is the moment where growth becomes real, not imagined, where your life starts responding differently to you because you are responding differently to yourself. And once you experience this even once, the illusion begins to crack, because you finally see that the enemy was never your depth, your intelligence, or your sensitivity. It was your refusal to move while carrying them forward. As we move deeper into understanding this silent enemy, we must confront a particularly insidious aspect: the ways your own beliefs, assumptions, and mental shortcuts reinforce its grip. Often we imagine the enemy as external, a boss, a circumstance, a toxic person, but the more profound truth is that it thrives inside the very architecture of your mind. Every assumption you carry, every automatic reaction you allow, every unexamined belief functions as a brick in the walls of this invisible prison. You may have cultivated intelligence, talent, even wisdom, yet the enemy remains because the mind clings to patterns rather than truth. Consider how much of your daily life is guided by habits you don't question. You decide, sometimes unconsciously, based on comfort, fear, or previous conditioning. The silent enemy knows these patterns intimately. It doesn't need to manipulate you overtly. It only needs to rely on the paths you've already paved. Your mind has learned to conserve energy, to avoid discomfort, and in doing so, it prioritizes the familiar over the necessary. Even when you intellectually recognize a better path, your body, emotions, and instincts hesitate. The enemy is patient. It doesn't rush. It waits for moments when you falter, when you doubt, when fatigue clouds clarity. Then it quietly asserts its influence and you follow without resistance. There is a subtler dimension at play: self-deception. Your mind is capable of rationalizing, reframing, and justifying almost anything. You convince yourself that procrastination is strategic planning, that avoidance is prudence, or that fear is wisdom. The enemy doesn't need to shout. It whispers in the language of reason. And because you trust your reasoning, you allow it to continue unchecked. Over time, these justifications accumulate, forming a thick barrier between who you are and who you could become. You are trapped not by circumstance, but by consent. And this is the hardest trap of all to recognize. Emotional regulation, or the lack of it, is another tool the silent enemy exploits. Strong feelings are signals, not commands, yet the mind often treats them as imperatives. Anxiety warns, but the mind interprets it as a stop sign. Desire calls, but the mind interprets it as danger. By mistaking emotion for authority, you surrender decision-making power to impulses that reinforce fear, doubt, and inertia. The enemy thrives in this confusion, guiding your actions subtly, steering you away from growth while convincing you it is protecting you. Cognitive bias is another hidden mechanism. Confirmation bias, negativity bias, and the tendency to overgeneralize create a self-perpetuating cycle. You notice evidence that aligns with your fears and ignore evidence that supports change. You exaggerate setbacks and minimize successes. The silent enemy doesn't need to invent problems. It amplifies the ones you already see and obscures the ones that would help you move forward. Your mind becomes a mirror, reflecting only the narratives it already believes, keeping you confined in the illusion of limitation. Furthermore, the enemy exploits your relationship with certainty. Humans crave security. We seek answers, guarantees, and predictability, yet life rarely offers them. The mind, in its attempt to maintain control, clings to imagined certainties, rules, beliefs, routines that feel safe but prevent adaptation. Every time you allow this craving for security to dictate action, the enemy solidifies its hold. You may call it caution, discipline, or rationality, but in truth it is the mind's fear masquerading as wisdom. There is also a powerful interplay between self-identity and limitation. The mind is deeply attached to its existing sense of self. You are who you have been, and any deviation feels like a threat. Growth, transformation, and radical change all demand that identity shift, even temporarily. The silent enemy uses this attachment to anchor you. It whispers that embracing your potential is risky, that attempting something beyond your current skill or understanding is foolhardy, that comfort is preferable to uncertainty. Every moment you listen, the walls of the prison grow higher. The path to liberation, then, is not about discovering external tools, strategies, or shortcuts. It is about learning to recognize the subtle manipulations of your own mind. Awareness itself becomes the weapon. Begin to observe automatic thoughts without judgment, to question assumptions before acting, to separate impulse from decision. Every time you act consciously, even in small ways, you weaken the enemy's authority. By reclaiming agency in seemingly minor moments, choosing clarity over comfort, courage over hesitation, you begin dismantling the invisible walls brick by brick. Finally, there is the paradox that growth demands. Discomfort is not only inevitable, it is necessary. The enemy thrives in attempts to avoid it, but the mind cannot evolve without it. The more you lean into discomfort, the less the enemy can operate through stealth. Each challenge faced consciously, each fear confronted rather than rationalized away, each step toward alignment with your true potential chips away at its control. The silent enemy inside your head is powerful, patient, and intimate, but it is not invincible. Recognition, conscious choice, and deliberate action are the keys. You're not fighting an external force. You are reclaiming the leadership of your own mind. Each act of awareness, each moment of courage, each choice made despite fear diminishes its influence and restores your freedom. And so as you continue on this journey, remember this: the enemy is not outside of you. It lives in the patterns you allow, the assumptions you trust, and the fears you obey. To break free, you must act with clarity, courage, and unwavering attention. Freedom begins the moment you choose to step beyond the whispers of your own mind. Now, as we arrive at the final piece of this journey, we must confront perhaps the most profound aspect of the silent enemy. Living inside your head, its mastery over time and attention. This enemy does not merely influence isolated moments. It orchestrates entire patterns of thinking, shaping how you perceive past failures, future possibilities, and even the present moment. It thrives in the unnoticed allocation of your attention, in the quiet but relentless hijacking of your mental energy. You might think you are living intentionally, but if your attention drifts unconsciously toward worry, regret, or self-doubt, the enemy controls the very lens through which you see the world. Consider how much of life is spent ruminating over what went wrong, replaying conversations that never happened, or imagining outcomes that may never occur. These mental rehearsals feel productive, they masquerade as preparation, but in reality, they reinforce the invisible chains the enemy has placed around your mind. By dwelling on mistakes, you amplify guilt and shame, which diminishes your sense of agency. By projecting into uncertain futures, you cultivate fear and hesitation. The silent enemy understands this intimately. It knows that controlling attention is the fastest way to control behavior, because action always follows thought. Furthermore, the mind's preoccupation with control and certainty works hand in hand with this enemy. You may believe that planning, predicting, or overthinking protects you from failure, yet these behaviors often serve the silent adversary rather than your higher self. Overplanning can be a sophisticated form of procrastination, a way to delay action while feeling busy and justified. The enemy encourages this under the guise of rationality, keeping you trapped in a cycle where thinking replaces doing, analysis replaces courage, and contemplation replaces living. Each minute spent in this loop reinforces the walls of the mental prison. This enemy also manipulates perception. Your judgments about yourself and the world, often subtle, almost invisible, are filtered through its lens. You begin to interpret events not as they are, but as extensions of limitation and fear. Opportunities appear riskier than they are. Challenges loom larger than reality. Potential is dismissed as impossible. Even the voices of encouragement, reason, or inspiration are drowned out because your attention has been conditioned to default toward the enemy's narrative. The world seems hostile, progress feels impossible, and your sense of self becomes increasingly constrained. Equally important is the way the enemy exploits emotional triggers. Every time you respond emotionally without awareness, anger, frustration, disappointment, it tightens its grip. These reactions are normal, but the mind often confuses them with directives. I feel afraid, therefore I must retreat. I feel inadequate, therefore I must wait. I feel doubt, therefore I must do nothing. The enemy thrives in these unexamined assumptions because unchecked emotions can dictate behavior without conscious choice. Each emotionally reactive moment becomes another brick in the prison, reinforcing patterns that keep you stagnant. Yet this enemy's greatest vulnerability lies precisely in what it fears the most: conscious choice and directed attention. When you begin observing your thoughts without judgment, you disrupt the automatic patterns it relies upon. When you deliberately focus on what is constructive rather than what is comfortable, you reclaim control. Awareness is the lever that moves the heaviest walls of this mental prison. Every intentional decision, no matter how small, signals to the enemy that its influence is no longer absolute. Even choosing to notice your own fear, to pause before reacting, to question a long-held assumption, these are victories that ripple outward. Another critical point is the role of self-compassion in dismantling this invisible adversary. The enemy thrives on self-criticism, perfectionism, and the belief that you must always be right or in control. These pressures amplify anxiety and reinforce limitation. But when you practice self-compassion, acknowledging your struggles without judgment, forgiving mistakes, and embracing growth over perfection, you weaken the enemy's influence. You replace internalized oppression with internal guidance. You shift from being manipulated by fear to being led by intention. This is not a quick fix. It is a deliberate cultivation of mental resilience. Finally, liberation comes from a consistent interplay of attention, awareness, and action. Each day, each decision, each conscious observation chips away at the walls of this invisible prison. Freedom does not arrive as a single dramatic event. It is the accumulation of countless moments where you choose presence over distraction, courage over avoidance, and clarity over fear. The silent enemy can be patient. It can be cunning and it can be persistent, but it cannot survive in a mind that consistently directs attention with purpose and engages with life intentionally. So as you face this final truth, understand that the silent enemy's greatest power lies in your distraction and unconscious compliance. The key to liberation is to reclaim attention, to act with consciousness, and to cultivate self-awareness as a daily practice. Each act of focus, each moment of deliberate choice, each small exercise of courage erodes the prison walls. Your mind may have been working against you for years, but with persistent awareness, you can turn it into your most powerful ally. And so the ultimate reality becomes clear. Freedom is not found outside of you. It is reclaimed inside through mastery of attention, intentional action, and unwavering awareness. The silent enemy may have lived inside your head, shaping your perception and decisions. But the moment you choose conscious engagement, you take back the keys to your own mind. The silent enemy may have lived inside your head for years, but the moment you choose conscious awareness, deliberate focus, and courageous action, you take back the keys to your own mind and true freedom begins.